Hi, welcome to the Working World. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham.
And Jamie, we just met with Paul from PerchPeek, who's the CEO and co-founder. Lost for words. What an amazing conversation. Everything from how PerchPeek started, the whole entrepreneurial kind of journey that he went and his co-founders went on, and then his insights into mobility, and then perhaps would he come back and do mobility again if he had the time? We'll have
Stay
to wait and find
tuned.
out.
Stay tuned for that answer. No, absolutely. I think that he's a wonderful personality, a guy who got into relocation because he hated relocation. I hated his experience, and so yeah, really, really fascinating story. I'd encourage you to listen to every word. Yeah, enjoy.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the Working World. How are you? It's so nice to see you again.
Yeah, so good to see you again, Karen. I am doing very well, thank you. I'm very much looking forward to the podcast today.
Yes, we're looking forward to discussion. I know Jamie is. He's got a line of questions for you.
Well, I tell you what, I think that the nice part is to have Paul, who, of course, runs his own show, PerchPeek Pods, and having him on our show is a real honour. I think,
Thank you.
Paul, your not only your experience in the industry, but your understanding in the industry is fantastic. I think that what I want to do today, besides the obvious questions, is how did you get here and all that sort of stuff. And this is actually Karen's idea, is more looking into the sort of entrepreneurial journey that you've gone through to get to where you are. Because, we were talking about there's a number of relocations specialists out there and experts out there who come up with some unbelievable ideas. And many of them, don't see that to fruition. But obviously, you're the exception to that rule. And so I think, probably the first question is, how did you get into it? Because obviously you're Oxford educated, you've been in banking, investment
Yeah,
banking, I think, and Amazon, and so you've had this sort of pretty good life
yeah,
to date, and then pivoted to
Why
where you are.
mobility?
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, why do I join the crazy kids of mobility? Good
Exactly.
question. I ask myself every day, but no, oh, so fun, so fun. I love this. So I think as you said, Jamie, I think it's so many people have that underlying thing of relocating and it being a bit terrible. And that's basically what I had and my co-founders had. It just first time we were moving, it was in banking and Amazon, both relocate heaps of people. I moved myself a couple of times. And it was just so stressful. And in particular, there were a couple of things that I thought at the time were, and still think is so fragmented. There's so many moving parts
Pardon the pun.
that yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is it's so many of the services and the like aspects that you do when you relocate, you're sort of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole of so many of the things. Even just take something like getting set up for a bank account or organizing for your like to find a house, whatever it might be. They're not really that well set up for people from who are relocating. They're normally set up like the domestic market. And so that you're having to sort of try and like massage your way around all of these restrictions. And that was really, we were like, okay, this is such a big problem, literally faced by pretty much every country around the world. There's nowhere that's easy to relocate to that we found. And we were like, okay, we're really passionate about this. We know that immigration in particular is such a from my studies is like such an important part for driving global economic growth. So it's something that's not going away. Let's focus on building a platform that can help make it a little bit easier to fuel that journey.
Sorry, just one more question. How bad was it that you actually left Amazon
Yeah,
and got, I
it's
mean, like seriously, that must have
I,
been so horrific for
it's
you. Going like, I'm just going to change the world. I'm going to
it's
give up my current career.
yeah, it's so true because it's actually I think the thing really that just kept nagging at me was that even before I joined Amazon, I'd sort of had the idea, had this sort of noodling that it was painful, and really it wasn't a single sort of event like, oh, I just had this one horrific thing happen. It was just the like recurring nature again of, oh my God, another person that's having a terrible move,
Yeah,
another like it's
it's not just happening to you. Yeah.
exactly. And like I loved my time at Amazon, like really amazing place to work. But just after a while, I was like, wow, this problem is not going away. So um, yeah, why don't I go try and solve it? Didn't know anything about mobility at the time, but yeah, here we are a few years later, still not knowing that much, but I definitely understand how crazy it is to try and solve now, at least.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is you're probably, by the sounds of it, starting to pick up that it's not just happening to you, right? Like it
Yes.
happens to a lot of people, and there are common threads that you could pull out of all of those use cases, which of course,
Yeah,
obviously in your mind started to conceptualize a gap in the
exactly.
market, a model, and then
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Ex
curious though how you went from conception to PerchPeek. Like
Great.
there's a few steps in there, and particularly
Yeah.
the funding piece that you and I have spoken about before. I found that
Mm.
fascinating about how you got seed funding, and how,
Hmm.
for all those kind of wannabe entrepreneurs out there, you know,
Yeah.
some insights
This
into
is
that would be wonderful.
a really great question because obviously that is a downside of leaving banking slash Amazon and doing your own
Mhm.
thing is
You didn't have
the
no
pay
pay.
is yeah, exactly. So we'll speak about the funding side.
Yeah.
But as you say, um, the stitching together of, hey, all of these people are having this problem and they're similar problems, so we should be
Mhm.
able to, standardize and solve some of these problems at scale is kind of the hub of PerchPeek is like, hey, everyone's going through these similar pain points. Let's
Mhm.
try and codify some of them and
Mhm.
support people through. The right at the start, one of the biggest challenges is you kind of have this idea that, hey, we want to build this platform where anyone moving anywhere in the world can go to organize research, receive support, and drive their entire move through. That's a
Mhm.
hell of a long way to operationalize that from thing. And one of the most important things is getting some funding to be able to hire developers. I was non-technical and actually be able to build the first platform, get your first
Mhm.
customers, and then go from there.
Mhm.
Um, this was like 5 years ago, like not a very sort of I was mid-20s at the time,
Sure.
not a very sort of investable person, so we say. So the went on LinkedIn, typed in angel investors, and then just started pinging people on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
It was crazy. And some people say, hey, they're angel investors. For those that aren't that familiar, that means they sort of like doing sort of seed investment checks into
Sure.
early stage businesses.
Sure.
And just started hammering people on LinkedIn, being like,
Mhm.
hey, got this idea. I tried to
Mhm.
focus on people that were that were sort of had moved themselves, so maybe
I
felt
was
the pain.
I was gonna say you'd have to find someone who understands the problem statement, right, that you're trying to solve. Like that would be a
Yeah.
far easier sales pitch
Yeah,
than
someone who says, I'm not going to quit my job and start an app, but I'm happy to throw some money for you because you're brave enough to do it.
because
I'd
my
rather you
move was
do it
Exactly.
than
terrible.
ever. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And that was it. And it's really interesting you say that, Karen, because
Mm,
initially, so we're sort of doing all these meetings, and initially I was still at Amazon, and I remember being in some of the phone booths and having these calls, and them being like, "No way, no way," and like, "Oh God, we're never getting anywhere." But
Mhm.
initially, I focused on London, which obviously is a very international market.
Mm.
But actually, something that worked incredibly well was we then switched our focus to New York and the Middle East for fundraising.
Interesting.
And that was actually quite. I remember the first trip we did. There were like four of us, like with a whiteboard saying, "Hey, responded, meeting set, etc."
Mm.
And the run-ups to this trip to Dubai, and the I landed in Dubai. I think I maybe had like 50, 60 meetings in a week.
Wow.
It was just every day, just rotating through the financial center, just coffee. I was so wired on coffee by the end of it. It was insane.
yeah,
But
imagine.
but what yeah,
Jet
but
lag
what
and
was
coffee, what a perfect combination.
exactly. But what was so amazing there, and this is sort of maybe too granular, but what was really amazing is New York and Dubai, both huge transplant populations. Everyone moves to New York, everyone moves to Dubai. So nearly everyone is like, wow, like I recognize this challenge because I've been through it myself.
Sure.
That was one thing. Second thing was actually which was an interesting psychological effect, because you were only there for 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
People kind of had to meet with you fast, and or else you're gone. So it sort of sped everything up, and it meant that
Sure.
if you had to have like second, third conversations, and so having struggled for a bit initially for that seed funding, then we sort of were like, oh, okay, we've sort of found the people that had money and were like, yeah, as you mentioned, Jamie, able to say, yeah, we don't want to quit our nice cushy jobs in banking, etc., but we're happy to throw a bit of cash at someone who's willing to give it a pop.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. It's that old saying, I'm an overnight success. It just took me 10 years to get there.
Oh my
Mm.
God.
How long was this period for you? Because it sounds like, oh, I just 1 week I decided to quit. Next week I was in Dubai.
Oh my God.
The week after I got the cash, and then we started, like what, like let's slow it down and try and bring you back to that time. I don't want to traumatize you
I was
with
gonna
60
say,
meetings in a week.
Yeah.
I feel like you should
Just
be
give
laying
us
Oh
on
a
a
little.
couch.
Yeah,
yeah. This is
exactly.
this is this is great. So to get granular, I ended up quitting my job and leaving Amazon summer of 2018. And we'd raised a tiny amount of capital, but not really very much. And we sort of had bumbled along, released an MVP, but like a minimum viable product, and had it, but it wasn't going well great. I'll tell you that much. So then it was like, and I remember two things vividly. One was just you go from a very high-paced world like at Amazon finance, where your calendar is full of meetings. When
Mhm.
you first start out by yourself, you're like, wow, I've just got the whole week. And you're trying to create the meetings initially, but you don't have
Yeah.
any natural momentum. And that is the thing I remember most, just being like, wow, there is literally nothing is moving forwards without myself and the co-founders. So that was one big memory. And then ta tangibly, really, it wasn't until the end of 2019 that we really started to do a bit more fundraising, and
Perfect
we
timing for COVID.
I know exactly, and I think the big thing for us there was initially we were focused on consumers,
Mhm.
because that was the experience we had was, hey, personally, we struggled, and we didn't know anything about the like corporate mobility world really, and so we were just focusing on consumers, and that's quite a tough business model
Yeah.
initially because they relocate once. Let's say you relocate to Australia, and then we're like, hey, do you want to relocate again? And they're like,
You're
no,
not
we
getting
actually really
repeat
like this side.
customers.
Yeah,
No.
exactly. So you're,
Even if
you're
it's a
sort of
good
like,
move. Yeah.
exactly. In fact, if it's a good move, they're less likely to come back. So it's sort of
Mhm.
it's so that was interesting. So yeah, it definitely wasn't an overnight success. And then yeah, all sorts of um things get along the way. And then but yeah, it was at least I would say until it was only really summer of 2020 that I really felt like we were um starting to like build what is now PerchPeek, the sort of modern RMC.
Mhm.
So it was a couple of years in the sort of wilderness of just like passing the cap around investors, hunting different ideas. So
Mhm.
and yeah, it was a long time.
And your first client, you don't have to name names, but sectors.
Oh my God. So just when I look back at some of the early clients we had, real real hodgepodge. A couple of I think funny stories. Mostly tech, as you can imagine.
Hmm.
We had a, a nice tech-based experience for relocating. So some clients were liking that. Another thing that I think on the subject of the importance of going in person places, as you said, Jamie, um, the uh, the we basically moved into global mobility just before COVID, and I
Hmm.
remember it being so stressful. Went, we had like our first three pilots lined up in February of 2020. And we're like, oh, sweet, like
Wow.
it's going on. And then they all got canned. They were sort of like, yeah, we're probably
Yeah.
not going to need to relocate people anymore. And we're like, oh, goodness me. So that was a bit stressful.
Mm.
And then and then we had that first lockdown in Europe. That was from sort of March to June. And then I remember I'd met I won't name her, but I'd met someone in December, one of the first people I met, and I remember her saying we were just in the UK at the time, and she was saying, I mean, your app looks great, but I moved people to the Netherlands and the UK, so it's not very helpful just to have the UK. And I was
Mm,
like, yeah, that I can see that being quite a big problem for corporate mobility. So actually, the start of that sort of very quiet time was good for us initially because we could
Mm.
really focus on expanding internationally. And then as soon as the restrictions lifted on lockdown, I actually went and spent a couple of months in the Netherlands, just making sure things were well set up there, and then we actually randomly ended up with quite a few Dutch clients as our early clients, just because it was
okay.
there and meeting people
Yeah.
and yeah, that aligned with tech. But it's funny how those things happen now. It wasn't
Yeah, it's a bit
um,
organic.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, quite
Yeah.
organic based on what the market was saying to us at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And COVID obviously knocked you guys for a six. I mean, if you had any Australian clients, you probably weren't doing any business at all, particularly if they were headquartered in Melbourne. Um, but were you getting involved in a lot of kind of more one-way kind of repatriations and getting people out of locations, more of that kind of
Good.
crisis management work in the
Yeah.
beginning?
Really good question. I think something that was quite I reflect personally as one of the most fortunate things timing wise for us was that is slightly counterintuitive is whilst it seems terrible that we launched just as COVID was happening, the
Mm,
benefit of that relative to most existing RMCs or global mobility businesses is that we didn't have a massive roster of clients. We didn't have lots of revenue. We were still so early stage
mhm,
that we it wasn't sort of like we saw a massive drop in moves because we'd only just started. We didn't have any customers, so it was kind of like actually that was quite fortunate that we didn't have that huge like expectations and suddenly we're having to like fight fire with fire. So it delayed things
sure.
for sure. Second
And
thing was, oh, go
not a
ahead.
lot of huge overheads, and it wasn't like you opened a
Exactly,
restaurant,
Yeah.
2 weeks
exactly,
before COVID hit.
exactly,
But I got to say,
exactly.
when you said that was the time you started, I was a bit like, wow, that's straight
Yeah,
into the storm. But
yeah.
yeah, I think as you said, the overheads probably weren't so high, and you had nothing to lose, right? Because you had no customers there. So
Exactly. Is that
mm.
we had no clients, which is really sort of counterintuitive. And then the other two things that actually were quite fortunate in retrospect. One I touched on was one of the hardest things when you're building an RMC is having that global coverage. And it sort of gave us time to figure out, okay, how are we going to do that? So
Yeah.
that was really important. And then the third thing was, whilst it was crazy initially for people in global mobility and stayed pretty crazy throughout COVID, actually what we did see is for lots of people, their sort of core day to day had dropped off a lot.
Mhm,
So we actually, the global mobility community is so kind anyway with their feedback, but
mhm.
they had a bit more time to spend helping us understand the industry and give feedback on the product. So that was actually quite beneficial in some ways. So that then, as we sort of came out of that first lockdown,
Can hit the
we were
ground
going well.
running. Mm.
Jamie, to your point though, that it was, I remember thinking initially, are we ever going to move anyone to Australia? Because it was so, we were like, this is crazy. It was so, yeah,
Not for a
we were like, oh,
while.
when are they going to open
I
up?
agree.
It
I
was
think there
so,
was a period for everyone where we're like, hang on, is this the rest of our life? Like, is this, are we, and
I
particularly
know.
as Karen said before, living in Melbourne, I think we had the longest lockdowns, and it was just, you think, is this really going to be how we're going to live forever? Because
Mm.
it's
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's painful.
it's crazy. Yeah.
So what were you positioning, or what do you position now as PerchPeek's, I guess, point of differentiation when it comes to RMCs throughout the
Yeah.
world? Because there's a few of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your, I guess, your sales pitch behind that?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's typically three main areas that we try to differentiate ourselves on.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly is just the employee experience, which is ultimately the thing we care the most about,
Mm-hmm.
and that is making like having the entire relocator experience driven through PerchPeek instead of having this fragmented mess of 8 different email threads with lots of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's nicely brought into to one beautiful platform. which obviously that's very biased and only my opinion, but people really like, and then they sort of receive 1 year of relocation coaching as standard. So the experience is very nice for the person relocating.
Mhm.
What was interesting was that often works very well, but as we know, cost is often such a big driver of business decisions.
Mhm.
And so the second thing we differentiate on is facilitating lower cost relocation programs
Mhm.
and saying you don't necessarily have to have a full household goods shipment, 60 days corporate housing. You have to have a fully managed benefits program. We do a lot of flexible programs where maybe you just have the employee has a bit more choice,
Mhm.
and we're very our platform is very well set up to enable that choice from people relocating,
Yeah.
and so that can actually help you save a lot of money versus traditional programs where you're always paying for those expensive benefits.
Sure.
That's the second. And then the third is on data, which I think as an industry, global mobility has often been starved for what's happening. Are our relocators happy? How much are we spending? Are we seeing ROI? And again,
Mhm.
because the entire relocator experience is driven through PerchPeek, we are able to generate very rich insights for our clients, such as, okay, which demographics are struggling with your current relocation policy? Where are you
Mhm.
spending too much versus your competitors?
Mhm.
And being able to sort of generate some of those data so that mobility can be a bit more strategic internally. So those are the three areas: experience, cost, and data,
Yeah.
typically.
Yeah. And I think like it's funny that you say we're data starved. I actually think it's the opposite. I think we have too much data. It's just we don't know what to do with it, and we're
Mm.
time poor in the fact of being able to do it, pull those rich insights from that data, right? Like you get your weekly reporting or your monthly reporting from your partners, but it's like, oh, okay, it's Excel spreadsheet. Yep, I'll look at that later. And later never comes because
Oh,
you're firefighting or your BAU operation liaising. It's a big word. Um,
mm,
so yeah, so I think it was funny. I was in a workshop once, and I think one of the vendor partners asked what would corporates like to see from their data. And it was like, for me personally, I'm a very visual person. I talk with my hands, and I'm like visualizing shapes when we're talking. And so for me, I was like, you just need to give it to me in graphical form, like an Excel spreadsheet
yeah,
or like a laundry list of paragraph is the worst thing ever. Um, so I don't know that that necessarily resonates with everybody. There are certainly, practitioners who love a good Excel spreadsheet and they can run all
yeah,
their VLOOKUPs on it. But I think it's the important message there is understanding your customer and knowing what
yes,
exactly the person behind that
yeah,
brand actually wants to see. And I think your focus on providing those insights to the data is taking that to the next level rather than
exactly.
just the data itself.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and that definitely the two things there is one, the instant insights, as you say, so doing some of that work for people.
Hmm.
So that, and then two is unifying the data in the sense of you don't necessarily want to get Excel spreadsheets from 15 vendors that all call things slightly different ways, and then you're
Hmm.
sort of having to spend ages collating that into a central spreadsheet, doing all the VLOOKUPs, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
What story
oh
is it
crap.
telling, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, this employee email address is formatted slightly different, so now I can't get it, and everyone's been in that hole of like, oh,
Yeah.
and then you just end up giving up. So
Yeah.
the ease of the data is the key point, as you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Well, coming in as a I guess as an industry outsider, and
Mm,
I don't know if I could label you as a disruptor,
yeah,
but
that's fine.
coming in as an outsider disruptor, what were the things that were glaringly obvious to you that needed fixing in the industry? Right. And I suppose that's the first half of my question. And the second half is, do you think that these things have been addressed or are being addressed, or are they still issues?
Mm, great question. I'm gonna say the first thing that the first thing that really springs to mind when you said that was a story of the very first conference we went to. And so we literally didn't know what an RMC was at this stage. We didn't know what a DSP was. We just didn't know anything. It was that we were so naive. We knew that we had like relocator pain points. So anyway, we go to this conference, we're chatting to everyone, we're just having the time of our lives, we're showing them the platform, loving life. And then we go to one of the panel sessions, and and it was how to make global mobility more affordable. And like the opening sort of gambit of this panel session was, imagine if I told you we could relocate someone from New York to London for only £100,000. And we're sitting there going, that seems like a lot of money. And then lots of other people in the room are like, wow, that seems so amazing. How would you ever do that? And
You're
so
like,
from
what am
an
I missing here?
yeah, I
Exactly.
genuinely because we didn't come at things from like a traditional assignment perspective where you're
Yeah.
sort of thinking, oh, even just the tax obligations are, normally double that. So at the time we didn't know any of that stuff. We just knew the sort of like one way like costs. And that was the thing
PFS.
that really stuck out was like, wow, actually a lot of the traditional mobility industry has been focused on assignments and like
Mhm.
they're for very good reason, quite expensive with the tax obligations and repatriating people, and those you're doubling the costs immediately when you move them there and you move them back,
Yeah.
etc. And that was the thing that we, from my time in finance and at Amazon, was like actually the majority of the moves I was seeing there were one-way transfers for hiring, not those traditional assignments. So that it was the slight disconnect between actually the majority of the moves happening in the world are not these assignments, but our
Mhm.
industry is sort of built up around these assignments. So that was the sort of thing that I was really sort of thought, wow, this is kind of crazy, and we were focused on, and I think that has got better over the last 5 years, and I think a lot of people are innovating and trying to produce more tailored solutions, but I don't think it's necessarily perfect yet by any means.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I feel like whether you have a one-way program or a traditional assignment program or a combination of both, I think it's driven by a couple of things. One is obviously the sector that you're in. So, traditionally the tech sector is a lot of one-way moves. Outside of that, you'll have, say, mining or engineering, which is traditionally kind of made up of assignments or FIFOs and those types of arrangements. But regardless of that too, you also have the project managers and the managers sitting behind that who have experience with either one or the other. And so if you bring $100,000 move across in front of, let's say, a manager in the tech sector who's used to seeing, a $50,000 move, for example, they're going to fall off their chair because the assignment cost behind the $100,000 move is so foreign, and they can't, for them to grapple and understand where the increase in cost comes from. A lot of
Yeah.
education needs to happen. And particularly since COVID and the rise of cost of everything, not just mobility, but specifically mobility as well, educating the rise of costs and why things cost what they do now is what being, I think, one of the biggest challenges that GM professionals have faced in the
Mm.
last 4 or 5
Yeah,
years.
completely agree. And
Mm.
the one thing that I really agree with there is also, and we see this a lot now, is why should it be an assignment versus a one-way transfer?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
often in those instances, you mentioned FIFO moves. Clearly, you're not going to do them as a one-way transfer. That is a
Hmm.
great use case for like why you should do an assignment. Like, and there are really good use cases for that. If it's genuinely only going to be a year, 2 years, etc. What we see is if you're saying it should just be an assignment, unless the reasoning is very rock solid for that,
Hmm.
a lot of people, which depends on your locations, your culture, the type of move, etc. But a lot of pressure to sort of think about, should we just move them there permanently? And then if they want to move back in a few years, then we'll move them back permanently. It's not and that's been an interesting trend as well. People sort of saying, hey, why don't we just perm transfer them in and then perm transfer them back
Yeah.
if they want to?
Which is a more cost-effective way to do it, right? The other
Exactly.
side of that balance is incentivizing the individual to go there, particularly when it's either hardship locations or just unattractive locations,
Yes,
that they don't see a career for themselves or even their partner, more importantly. Um,
exactly.
So incentivizing them to go, sometimes that guarantee of right of return that comes with an assignment,
Exactly.
or a promise of a role, not necessarily their
Yeah.
role, is often what will get them over the line versus, oh, you go one
Exactly.
way and we'll talk about you moving back at another point.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's where the locations are. Because I don't know what you see. We see that is nearly always driven by the location. As you say,
Yeah.
if you're asking someone to move where it's going to be maybe not as attractive for them and certainly not as attractive for their partner slash family, then it's a completely different kettle of fish than if you're asking people to move to Sydney and Melbourne, where
Yeah.
a lot of people are pretty excited to go get some sunshine. And it's like it's amazing.
Good
To
coffee.
that, Paul, I've got a whole head full of questions, and I do want to get onto the user experience, but
Mm,
I suppose my question at the moment is, you said you started off in tech. I just wonder how tech's going at the moment, how it's looking for moves of people. So number one is, what industries are you seeing are moving more and moving less, but also what
mm.
destinations? I mean, did Trump getting in see a mass exodus of people with a hand up to move away from
Yeah,
the US? I'm just curious to see what your sort of understanding of the global position
great.
goes on industry and by global geopolitics.
Yeah, great question. Because I would say this is a couple of years ago now, but another pretty crazy time for PerchPeek was we were quite heavy on tech initially, less so now, and tech went through massive layoffs towards the end of 2022 and 2023,
Exactly. Yeah.
having just had this big run up. And we went from having clients that would relocate hundreds of people a month to like literally three or four. And it was like, obviously, if they're laying off 15,000 people, they're not going to be relocating heaps straight away. So it was like just so crazy that time. The So I think what we would say is then tech itself went through a period of really sort of quite tightening the purse strings, trying to
Yeah.
hire not as much as possible. Now we are seeing it rebound quite a bit, particularly with return to office. People saying, because that was a dual thing, not hiring as much and being like, when we do hire, we're happy to hire remotely. Those two
Mhm.
trends are slightly reversing. So tech is definitely picking up. I think the other sort of big industries that and this is just PerchPeek's sort of view, is we're seeing a lot of consultant clients picking up globally. Again, I think
Wow.
a move from having been slightly more remote focused for a while during COVID to now being like, okay, no, clients expect us to be back on site, so that's generating a lot of movement. And then we're also seeing randomly quite a lot of construction as well, which I think is just age old. They have a lot of project-based workers there. On the US front, I think what has been interesting is a double whammy effect. Not, it's early days, but definitely quite a lot of people sort of saying, okay, employees maybe putting their hand up to say, maybe I will think about moving out of the US. That's quite difficult for mobility because hand uppers are quite challenging at times to support, but we've seen that a bit. I think the one effect we are definitely seeing on mobility teams generally is because Trump's threatening to tighten the immigration for H-1Bs a lot and other sort of key visa types. A lot of mobility and immigration teams saying, okay, what are our options here? Other visa pathways for the US, or but more commonly now, hey, where else are good locations? Should we be spinning up our Canada team, spinning up our Poland team, whatever it might be? Because that's people are very nervous about that with the second Trump administration.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
I think that this whole, sort of era we're in is very fascinating. I think, like it or love it, it's definitely captivating. What's
yeah, yeah.
now?
It's this is a completely unsolicited point, but it's one of the things I love most about our industry in general is like how interconnected global affairs it is, and you know,
Absolutely.
immigration rules are always changing, tax rules are always changing, on the ground things are always changing. So you're never going to get bored in this space because there's always things ch changing the whole time. So keeps you on your toes, keeps us all busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to say, no, so particularly in COVID, didn't love it, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was obviously when it was like when it's like every day, it's like, oh yeah, how many days quarantine do you have to do now? And you're
Yeah.
like, oh my
Oh,
God, it was
I,
hard to.
I was in Brisbane last night, and I was in a hotel, and I just hate hotel rooms. I just, air conditioning, I can't stand it. I just need the window. So I sort of turned the air conditioning off. It's quite hot in Brisbane. So halfway through the night, I get up again, turn it on for half an hour, and I turn it off again. And just the thought of sitting in a hotel room for 2 weeks would just drive me bonkers. I think I'd throw a
Oh
chicken through the
yeah,
window. I need the
yeah,
fresh air.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was a crazy
It's
time.
it is crazy.
I can remember some interesting stories that I'll save for another podcast another time that our expats
Yeah.
went through. But I'm kind of curious, and not to labor on the point of COVID, but COVID did, I guess, it did some interesting things. Paul, and I know you and I have kind of talked about this concept before from a mobility perspective. It gave us the opportunity to kind of have the spotlight and to demonstrate
Hmm.
the versatility and the skills that we provide as mobility practitioners. That diversity, I guess, has stuck for some individuals. Some scopes have broadened into remote work, into taking care of business travel, because obviously all those compliance gaps were open for everybody to see during that period. Are you seeing across your clients that you have that they're doing more with less, or are you seeing that they're still getting that adequate kind of spotlight and the resources that they need?
Yeah. I would say definitely both. What I would
Mm-hmm.
say is, in general, and this actually we see across HR, is people aren't that keen to expand their HR teams
Mm-hmm.
in general right now. It's really hard to get budget
Mm-hmm.
for HR roles, and so uh, mobility teams often we're seeing either they've had layoffs themselves in their team, or
Mm-hmm.
someone leaves and they can't get a backfill, but the work is still the same or more actually as things pick up. So definitely they're sort of being challenged to do more with less.
Mm-hmm.
Where we are seeing the mobility teams have a lot of success though is expanding their remit because of some of the skills they showed during COVID and have maintained to start bringing in other functions that maybe weren't necessarily typically within so business travel compliance, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
contingent workers often rolling up into mobility now, those sorts of areas that are helping the overall mobility function get buy-in. And what we see is if mobility teams can kind of increase their scope beyond the traditional core mobility,
Mm-hmm.
then it's actually easier for them to get budget for the mobility related aspects as well because they're just part of an overall bigger team. So it's a weird one where like just the numbers seem less scary whenever you're part of a bigger team that's also handling contingent workers and business travel compliance and stuff. Then it's like, oh, actually, if you need a couple of 100K for a mobility project, it's like in the scheme of the overall bigger number, it's much less. So it's
True,
like a
true.
weird dynamic there. So
Sure.
both, I would say, to answer
Okay.
your question.
That's a really, I mean, it's a perfect point you're making to my next question. When talking a budget and PerchPeek and what does that sort of look like? And here's your sort of, I suppose, your selfless time to have a plug about the
Yeah.
product. But I'm curious about obviously from a budgeting point of view, did you find that there was a gap in the market and this is sort of addressing that gap?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we sort of see two things. Often, if we're competing against other RMCs in the space, then we're coming from an existing budget. Most of the time they're already paying RMC fees of one form or another, and they're just if they choose PerchPeek, they transfer those over to PerchPeek. What has been quite interesting is on the other side of things, often we are supporting populations that maybe weren't supported
Yes.
historically
I
or were
think
just
that's a nice
supported
thing,
through.
right? Absolutely.
Exactly, and
Mm.
and that's great because it means we don't need to necessarily, it's not like a dogfight against other players in the space. It's actually we're unlocking the budget, and we're actually so passionate about that because then you're getting to help people that typically aren't receiving any support. So you're sort of expanding the overall mobility market
It's
by
always
helping
been
all these
so
people.
unfairly skewed, right? Because it's the CEO or the C-suite who
Oh,
get the help, and the regular, day-to-day worker who
it's
doesn't have a PA or someone who can assist, or
it's
or the funding to do it, and they've got to be like, okay, cool, Paul, we'll see you in Australia. Start, in Collins Street in Melbourne on 23rd of Feb.
it's
Good luck.
so crazy. It's so
Work it
crazy,
out.
and we're so passionate,
Yeah.
and we're so often like literally for the cost of one of your C-suite moves, you could support like 150, 200 other people with like
Wow.
with like some support, depending on how they set it up and how generous
Mm,
their things are. And that
Yeah.
it is, and often they're the people that really need the help, right? It's project-based work is, we see it in Australia a lot, like a lot of project-based care workers, because there's a massive shortage, etc. These are people
Mhm.
who really struggle, and yeah, we're very passionate about being able to support them, and that has been a gap to be able to affordably provide amazing support without having to have that sort of very traditional setup of benefits.
mm.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's great.
We have, I'm going to say a tradition, but we don't necessarily ask everybody. But I am going to ask, just because you have such a broad remit and insight into the industry, and certainly at a global level, if you, with your um, made up 8 ball, your crystal ball that you could look
Yeah.
into and shake, what do you see is on the radar for mobility globally? Or you can pick a region if you want for 2025.
Mm. Mm. A great question. So I think if I was to pick one trend that I think is uh, sort of gathering a lot of momentum, is that trend around mobility either having to expand their remit or
Mm-hmm.
sort of being left behind a little bit.
Okay.
And so that's really where we're seeing actually try
So
to
make or
align
break.
yourself. Yeah, make or break times, just
Okay.
because that's such a big trend seemingly to try and consolidate organizations
Yeah,
like
sure.
within a department. So and mobility often has an amazing place to help with such a wide variety of talent acquisition and compliance related tasks. There's huge scope for
Mm-hmm.
that, and with remote work requests now.
Sure.
But that's a sort of an area that we just see as a big trend. And then on a region, definitely the US, where we're going to see a lot of change in dynamics, is the US, both into and out of there, just because of the second administration and all of the executive orders coming out of there, and that
Sure.
just has a ripple effect for pretty much every global company, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I'm going to take Karen's crystal ball and I'm going to raise you a magic wand.
oh,
If you could change one thing in the industry tomorrow, what would it be?
Oof. I think this is going to sound like a funny one, and maybe I'm not that
All
well
right,
placed to
this
say
is the
this, but
best
like,
one. Go for it.
yeah, I think I'd love to just take a massive injection of confidence into the mobility industry. Because
yeah.
sometimes I think, like, obviously there's loads of amazing people, but sometimes I think people are nervous nervous about the value of the work that they do.
Mm,
And that is one that I think actually you see it's so valuable, mobility to organizations, and it's only getting more valuable as companies go global earlier.
mm,
And I think sometimes people are just because of the nature of, sometimes being a bit reactive with support, and we know relocating is stressful, so people complain that their visa's taking too long, or the
mhm.
household goods shipment, and the containers falling off in the ocean or whatever it is. It's kind of easy to sort of feel like things are always going wrong in our industry, and
Yeah.
like you never get told good job. It's just like, oh great, they got there, there's when it goes wrong. It's like a big old injection of confidence to say, hey, the work we do is valuable. It might be hard to like put an exact number on that,
Mm,
but we should have confidence in going for these projects, expanding our remit, at sort of really showing the value there would be
yeah.
my
So global pump up session for
exactly
relocating.
a big
Let's
old
all jump
yeah
on and we
exactly
flash mobs,
exactly
flash mobs of
exactly
relo people just saying, love it.
Oh dear.
exactly
You've
we'll do
planted a
that next
seed
time.
in Jamie's mind
I
now,
love it.
Paul.
No,
It would be fun.
I think you make a really valid point, right? Like I think that people do, they worry, and also, the assignees they also, look for problems. Oh, this is an issue. And we get this in the immigration space, and you've missed that thing. And is it really the end of the world? Probably not, right? But I think that, I'll get you there. Okay, will we smash a cup on the way? Probably. Is that the end of the world? No, it's not. It's an opportunity for you to buy a new cup. Which is, or a whole new container of stuff, and you've got insurance, and who cares?
Exactly, and it's really complicated supporting all of that stuff. So yeah, I think it's not only looking at the things that can go wrong or take too long, but saying, hey, here is all the successes, and joining up to that.
It could be make assignments cool again.
Yeah,
exactly.
Cats.
Or we could call it elevating our profile, one or the other.
Oh, okay. Well, I was for the Macca cap. You can go elevating your profile.
I like the Macca caps.
Look, Paul, it's been a super awesome conversation. I think we've both really enjoyed it. And thank you for your insights, particularly from that kind of startup view. That was really insightful, right through to your thoughts on the industry. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been great.
Absolutely. No, I think it's great. And what you've done in the industry and bravely stepping in. And I suppose that just be one more question. Sorry, Karen.
Oh, okay.
If you knew what you knew today, would you step into this industry again without any knowledge?
Do you want to know the answer to that?
Yeah, I do. Actually. I'm very curious.
I honestly think maybe not. I love the industry we're in so much, and I want to spend the rest of my life building PerchPeek for sure. Now we're here. It's just so freaking hard. It's like so hard building companies in this space, and it's so complex. And I just had no idea. I was so naive as to how hard it would be, and like just how much time it is. And like I haven't had the best time already, and enjoying it more every day. But like, frick, it's tough. It's tough. So like I would have had to think about it a lot more for sure.
Ignorance is bliss, and we're lucky that you were ignorant of what you're going into.
Yeah.
You've made a great product and a really big impact in the industry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been fantastic.
Not at all. It's been so fun being on the other side. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Yeah, exactly. Anytime. Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
See you later.
Yeah.